400 years ago, the great Inca Empire was discovered by Europeans. The Spanish conquistadores were some of the most feared warriors of all time. Now, a handful of these intrepid soldiers were about to take over a nation of millions. The Spanish conquest of the Incas would be one of history's turning points.
Comrades and friends, you have a choice. Return to Panama to be poor, or come with me to Peru to be rich. Which best becomes you as good Spaniards?
Francisco Pizarro's men were conquistadores, a group of men hardened by the battles to rid Spain of its Moorish invaders and fresh from conquests over the Aztecs in Mexico. Under Pizarro's leadership, this tiny expeditionary force of 170 soldiers and adventurers began their hazardous climb into the heart of the Inca Empire. They were emboldened by tales of fabulous wealth in the mountains. They did not know it, but gold and silver were plentiful beyond their wildest dreams. Gold was used to make drinking vessels for the elite, as well as for the jewelry that adorned them. This was a complex and sophisticated society. With a well-trained army, which had already conquered much of the 3,000-mile Andean chain, it was like a Roman Empire in the South American mountains. The Incas had medicine too. Later scholars would find that wounded warriors were given surgery for head injuries. But soon, they would be up against a formidable new force. Francisco Pizarro came from the inhospitable Spanish province of Extremadura. Illegitimate, unable to read or write, Pizarro became a soldier adventurer. Now in his mid-50s, a veteran of many campaigns in the Americas, the lust for power and glory drove him on. Inspired by Cortés, who had conquered the Aztec Empire in Mexico, Pizarro was convinced that even more wealth and treasure lay in the Americas. Pizarro had carefully handpicked his men. Many were from the same few villages in Spain, and 3 were Pizarro's half-brothers. Armed with swords and lances, and protected by strong but lightweight armor, Pizarro's men were a highly mobile and deadly force. Their horses were also used as weapons. Swift and strong, Spanish horses struck fear into the hearts of the Incas, who had never seen such an animal before. Legend has it that the Incas, having seen strange patterns around the moon, were expecting disaster.
It is an omen. A cruel war will tear apart the descendants of our great Inca. Then all will vanish in smoke.
15 years earlier, Cortez's invasion of Mexico had brought smallpox to the Americas. Now it had reached the Andes.
A great pestilence is sweeping the realm. None are immune. The Inca himself is dying. Bearded, hostile men are coming across the sea in great iron ships. They carry iron slings which spit out a burning fire.
In fact, smallpox had killed the Inca emperor and his first son, causing a civil war over who would succeed him. It was in the aftermath of this civil war, between two other sons, Huáscar and Atahualpa, that the Spanish entered the Inca Empire. As they journeyed up into the mountains, much of Peru lay in ruins. In 1530, the Inca Empire was still young, still expanding, with a fragile hold over some of the conquered tribes of the Andes. The Incas were sun worshippers, and in their remote mountain kingdom, they knew nothing of the outside world. Even so, the Incas had developed great skills. They were unparalleled architects and engineers. Using only stone tools, they fitted huge boulders together with great precision. Stone was revered. The Incas believed it was alive and stored the memories of their ancestors. The Incas had not discovered keystones to build round arches, so they used trapezoidal arches with large lintels instead. Their towns and cities were laid out in a geometric grid pattern, and the whole empire was networked with finely engineered irrigation canals. Inca society was hierarchical, controlled by a small elite of noble families. At the top was the Inca, a god king, surrounded by a court of sacred women. When an Inca emperor died, he was mummified and brought out on ceremonial occasions as if he was still alive. Beneath the Inca elite, all the rest were equal. Most lived off the land, and there was no private property. Everything was shared. Each person paid the Inca emperor in the form of his labor. The empire's great wealth lay in its agricultural produce and its textiles. Over 10 million people were crammed into the habitable valleys. The Inca population was so dense that every available piece of land was cultivated. Even hillsides were terraced and irrigated to grow corn and potatoes. To communicate across the empire and to move their armies, the ingenious Incas built a nationwide network of mountain roads. The Incas got their news through runners called chasquis. Inca culture had no wheels, no horses, and no writing. But a relay of chasquis could cover the 1,500 miles from Quito to Cuzco in just 1 week, carrying quipus, strings with knots, which conveyed facts and figures, and any news. Bad news was on the way. They were about to be discovered by Europeans. The conquistadores were devout Catholics and staunch royalists. All their missions were in the name of God and the King of Spain. The rest of the world had to be converted. As the Spanish approached, the 2-year Inca civil war had only recently been won by Atahualpa, a 30-year-old son of the dead emperor. His victorious armies were now in control of Cuzco and Jauja, while the new Inca emperor himself was in control of the city of Cajamarca. Atahualpa was small, but powerfully built. He was a shrewd politician who had cleverly united Andean tribes in his support. Atahualpa's triumph over his half-brother, Huáscar, had put him in control over virtually the whole of the Inca Empire. The Spanish learned that Atahualpa was camped outside Cajamarca with 50,000 of his men.
Pizarro told an Indian to tell Atahualpa, "I will be his friend and brother."
On the 15th of November, 1532, the Spanish reached the Inca town of Cajamarca. They couldn't believe what they saw.
We never thought the Indians could maintain such a proud estate or have so many tents in such good order. It filled all us Spaniards with fear and confusion.
On the plain below, and surrounded by his army of some 50,000 warriors, Atahualpa was more concerned to march in triumph to the capital, Cuzco, than with this small band of intruders. But compared with the Spaniards, Atahualpa's men were poorly armed. They had no swords, no cavalry, and underestimating the visitors' power was to prove a fatal mistake.
My uncle Atahualpa received them well and gave one of them our customary drink, chicha, in a gold chalice. The Spaniard threw it to the ground, which angered my uncle very much.
Nonetheless, Atahualpa gave his Spanish visitors quarters in barracks which lined the town square.
All were full of fear, for we were so few. All assembled to debate what should be done the following day. We kept watch in the square, from which we could see the campfires of the Inca army. It was a fearful sight. It looked like a brilliantly star-studded sky.
Though outnumbered 500 to 1, the conquistadores formed a desperate plan. They would kidnap the new emperor. The huge barracks which lined 3 sides of the main square at Cajamarca were each over 100 yards long and had many doors opening onto the square. It was perfect for an ambush.
Our plan was that on a signal, all were to charge out of their lodgings with the horsemen mounted on their horses. Pizarro would remain with a few horses and 20 foot soldiers. They were charged with the capture of Atahualpa's person.
The signal was to be the firing of muskets by conquistadores hidden in the square. But Atahualpa did not lower himself to visit the Spaniards. He was in the midst of celebrations and was making plans to consolidate his great victory in the Inca Civil War. Pizarro was getting increasingly desperate.
Tell your lord to come however he wishes. I shall receive him as a friend and a brother.
At that, Atahualpa decided to show off to the Spaniards. As the sun began to fall, Atahualpa and his entourage of 5,000 unarmed men entered the square of Cajamarca.
The Incas he had spying on us told Atahualpa we were all inside the hall, full of fear. None were to be seen on the plaza. And it was true what the Incas were saying, because I myself saw many Spaniards who, without knowing it, wet themselves through pure terror.
Dominican friar, Vicente de Valverde, left the Spanish quarters and walked into the square with his Inca interpreter.
And so I request and require you to recognize the Church as your mistress and as governess of the world and universe. And the High Priest called the Pope in her name, and in His Majesty the King of Spain in her place, as ruler and Lord King. And if you do not do this, with the help of God I shall come mightily against you, and I shall make war on you everywhere and in every way that I can. And I shall subject you to the yoke and obedience of the Church and His Majesty. And I shall insist that the deaths and destruction that come from this will be your fault.
And Atahualpa said to the priest, "Why does it not speak to me? This book tells me nothing."
Were trapped inside the square like llamas. The Spaniards killed them all, with horses, with swords, with guns, just as one might slaughter animals. From more than 5,000 men, barely 200 escaped.
The slaughter had taken only an hour and a half, and the dead included many of the Inca nobility. But Atahualpa was spared.
And when they were all dead, they took my uncle Atahualpa to a cell, where they bound him all night with a chain around his neck.
From his cell, the Inca emperor offered a huge ransom to his captors to set him free. His people brought back wealth from across the empire. Atahualpa judged that if he gave the Spaniards all the gold they wanted, they would go away. Beautiful works of art were melted down and turned into ingots. Their triumph did not give the Spanish complete control of Peru, but with Atahualpa, their prisoner, encouraged to run his massive empire from captivity, the Spanish were able to move freely without threat. In return, Atahualpa put the magnificent Inca food storehouses at Pizarro's disposal. Imprisoned in Cajamarca, Atahualpa was a long way from his stronghold in Quito. He also had loyal armies in Cusco and Jauja. But the civil war was hardly over, and much of the empire still regarded him as a usurper. They even looked on the Spanish as their allies. Over the mountains in Jauja, Atahualpa's most experienced general still had a large army. Pizarro sent men to invite him to visit Atahualpa. The general had silver horseshoes made to give to the Spaniards. He did not suspect that he too would fall into a Spanish trap. Now the Spanish had another illustrious captive. Through the end of 1532 and on into 1533, Atahualpa ran his empire from captivity. He kept hoping that the Spanish would release him when they collected their ransom. 6 tons of gold and 12 tons of silver had now been collected. All of it was divided between the conquistadores according to their rank. But there was still no sign that Atahualpa would be released. More conquistadores had now arrived from Spain. These newcomers were not part of the original deal. If Atahualpa were dead, perhaps a new deal could be struck to include them. They made up a story that Atahualpa had another army waiting in the hills and had sent orders to attack the Spaniards and rescue him. This was a lie, but Pizarro, nervous that his men might rebel, bowed to pressure. With chilling speed, the Spaniards tried Atahualpa for treason. He was sentenced to death by burning. For the Incas, burning destroyed the soul. To allow him, they said, to preserve his soul, the Spanish made Atahualpa a final offer. If he would convert to Christianity, he would be spared burning and be killed by garroting instead. As night fell on July the 26th, 1533, in the center of Cajamarca, Atahualpa, who had spent his final 9 months as a prisoner, was instructed in the articles of the Christian faith and christened Francisco. He was then executed. Despite his conversion, the Spaniards burnt his dead body. Pizarro, an upstart commoner, had tried and executed a monarch, one of the world's most powerful emperors. The Spanish king, Charles V, saw it as a dangerous precedent, and Pizarro narrowly escaped disgrace. With Atahualpa now dead, the leaderless Inca armies melted away into the hills. The Spanish then moved south, towards the Inca capital, Cuzco. This had always been enemy territory for Atahualpa, and Pizarro's force was welcomed. Though several rebellions did come near to forcing the Spanish out of Peru, they never quite succeeded. Finally, the Incas were forced to retreat further into the remoter reaches of their empire. But the most famous Inca site, the jewel of Machu Picchu, tucked away in the mountainous jungles of the Peruvian Andes, was never discovered by the conquistadores. The Spanish conquest of the Inca Empire was one of the most astonishing turning points in history. With it came death by disease, battle, or starvation for over 90% of the Incas, and the takeover of all Andean countries by the Spanish. If they had not kidnapped the Inca emperor, Pizarro's small band of conquistadores would almost certainly have been wiped out, as many expeditions were. And perhaps the tragic history of the Andes might have been very different.